Sometimes, the smallest act of kindness can change everything. But what if that kindness cost you everything you've worked for? Emily Morrison thought she was just doing the right thing when she defended a homeless woman in the lobby of San Francisco's most prestigious hotel. She had no idea that her decision would trigger a chain of events that would shatter everything she believed about justice, loyalty, and the true cost of standing up for what's right. This is a story about a receptionist who risked it all, only to discover that nothing was what it seemed.
Quick pause. Before we continue, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing. The rain hammered against the tall glass windows of the Grandview Hotel, each drop racing down the pristine surface like tears on polished skin. Emily Morrison adjusted her blazer for the third time that hour, a nervous habit she'd developed during her 3 years behind the mahogany reception desk. The lobby gleamed with the kind of wealth that made most people uncomfortable, all marble floors and crystal chandeliers that cost more than she'd earned in 5 years. It was a Tuesday evening in late November, and the hotel was preparing for its busiest season. Thanksgiving was just 2 weeks away, and San Francisco's elite had already begun booking their holiday stays. Emily watched as a couple in matching Burberry coats swept through the revolving door, barely acknowledging her greeting as they headed toward the elevators. She'd grown used to invisibility. In places like this, people who wore name tags were part of the furniture. Emily had taken this job right out of community college, desperate for something stable after her mother's medical bills had swallowed every penny of their savings. The Grandview promised good pay and better benefits, though the reality never quite matched the recruiting brochure. Still, she showed up every day, smiled at guests who looked through her, and reminded herself that this was temporary. Everything was temporary if you just kept your head down and worked hard enough. The afternoon shift was usually quiet, a little between the lunch rush and evening check-ins. Emily used the time to organize reservation files, her fingers moving automatically across the keyboard while her mind wandered to more pleasant places. She was saving for culinary school, had been for 2 years now. The balance in her account grew slowly, painfully slowly, but it grew. That's what mattered. Richard Westwood's office door stood closed at the far end of the lobby, a dark wood barrier that might as well have been a fortress wall. The hotel manager ran the Grandview with an iron fist wrapped in expensive cologne and Italian leather. He'd made his expectations clear during Emily's first week. The hotel's reputation was everything, and anyone who tarnished it would be gone before they could pack their desk. Emily had watched 3 receptionists come and go in her time here, each one fired for infractions that seemed almost arbitrary. A guest complaint, a missed detail, being in the wrong place at the wrong time. She learned to be careful, to anticipate problems before they materialized, to smooth over situations before they reached Richard's ears. It was exhausting, this constant vigilance, but it kept her employed. And employment meant health insurance for her mother's ongoing treatments, meant a roof over their heads, meant that culinary school dreams stayed alive even if it felt impossibly distant some days. The lobby doors opened again, and Emily glanced up with her practiced smile already in place. But the smile faltered when she saw who had entered. The woman was old, perhaps in her 70s, though it was hard to tell beneath the layers of worn clothing. Her coat had once been nice, Emily could tell. Probably expensive even, but time and weather had reduced it to something threadbare and stained. She carried 2 plastic shopping bags, the contents hidden beneath what looked like old newspapers. Her gray hair hung in wet tangles around a face mapped with wrinkles and exhaustion. She stood just inside the doorway, water dripping from her coat onto the immaculate marble floor, looking around the lobby with an expression Emily couldn't quite read. Not awe, exactly. Something more complicated than that. Emily's felt chest tighten. She knew what was coming next. She'd seen this play out before. The woman took a hesitant step forward, then another, making her way slowly across the lobby toward the seating area near the fireplace. A few guests looked up from their phones and newspapers, their expressions shifting from curiosity to discomfort to barely concealed disgust. One woman pulled her purse closer to her body as if poverty might be contagious.
The elderly woman seemed oblivious to the stairs, or perhaps she was just used to them. She lowered herself carefully onto one of the plush armchairs near the fire, setting her bags down beside her with a soft sigh of relief. Her hands trembled slightly as she held them toward the flames, seeking warmth. Emily's hands stilled on the keyboard. She should call Richard. That was protocol. Any situation that might make guests uncomfortable, any potential security issue, was supposed to be reported immediately. Her finger hovered over the extension. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the way the woman's shoulders had sagged with relief when she sat down. Maybe it was the trembling in those weathered hands. Maybe it was just that Emily remembered what it felt like to be cold and desperate, back when they'd lost their apartment and spent 3 weeks living in her mother's car, driving from parking lot to parking lot each night, trying to stay warm. She pulled her hand back from the phone. What Emily didn't know was that her decision to wait, to pause, to show mercy, had just set in motion a series of events that would destroy her career, expose dark secrets within the hotel, and reveal that the homeless woman in the lobby was the least powerless person in the building.
Marcus, the head of security, had noticed the woman too. He was already moving across the lobby, his hand resting on the radio clip to his belt. Emily saw him approaching and made a split-second decision. She stepped out from behind the reception desk, intercepting him halfway. "I've got this," she said quietly, positioning herself between Marcus and the elderly woman. Marcus frowned. "Protocol says we call management for situations like this." "I know the protocol. I'm handling it." There was a moment of tension while Marcus decided whether to push back. Finally, he nodded and retreated, though Emily could see him watching from his post near the entrance. She took a breath and walked toward the fireplace. Up close, the woman looked even more exhausted. Her eyes were closed, her face turned toward the warmth of the flames. Emily noticed details she hadn't seen from across the lobby. The woman's nails were clean despite her appearance. Her skin had the kind of weathering that spoke of exposure but not neglect. And there was something about the way she held herself, even in exhaustion, that suggested dignity. "Ma'am?" Emily kept her voice gentle. "Can I get you something? Maybe some water? Coffee?" The woman's eyes opened. They were a startling blue, clear and sharp despite the tiredness in her face. She studied Emily for a long moment before speaking. "That's kind of you." Her voice was rough but educated, the accent suggesting East Coast roots. "Water would be wonderful." Emily nodded and returned to the reception desk, filling a glass from the filtered pitcher they kept for guests. She grabbed a few packets of crackers from the hospitality basket, the kind they usually save for check-in, and brought everything back to the woman. "Here." Emily set the glass and crackers on the side table. "Take your time." "You're not going to ask me to leave?" The woman's tone was curious rather than confrontational. Emily glanced back at the reception desk, aware that other guests were watching. "You're not bothering anyone. You're just getting warm." "That's a kind answer, but it's not quite true, is it?" She nodded toward a businessman who was staring at them with obvious disapproval. "I'm bothering quite a few people, I'd imagined." Emily felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she met the woman's gaze steadily. "Then that's their problem, not yours." Something flickered in those blue eyes. Approval, maybe, or surprise. The woman picked up the water glass with both hands, taking small, careful sips. "What's your name?" the woman asked. "Emily. Emily Morrison." "Thank you, Emily Morrison." The woman set down the glass. "I'm Margaret. Margaret Sullivan." They sat in silence for a moment, the crackling of the fire filling the space between them. Emily knew she should get back to the desk, but something kept her there. Maybe it was the way Margaret held herself, that unexpected dignity. Maybe it was the nagging feeling that there was more to this encounter than appeared on the surface. The elevator chimed, and Emily's stomach dropped. She recognized the footsteps before she even turned around. Richard Westwood had impeccable timing for appearing at the worst possible moments. He strode across the lobby with the kind of purposeful movement that made people instinctively move out of his way.
At 45, Richard had the polished look of someone who'd spent his entire adult life in luxury hospitality. His suit was custom-tailored, his shoes reflected the chandelier light, and his expression could freeze fire. "Miss Morrison." His voice carried across the lobby, sharp enough to make several guests look up. "A word, now." Emily stood, her heart hammering. She caught Margaret's eye, saw something there that might have been concern, or might have been curiosity, and then turned to face her manager. "In my office," he said, not waiting for a response. Emily followed him across the lobby, acutely aware of every eye tracking their movement. Richard's office was exactly what you'd expect. All dark wood and leather, with photographs of himself shaking hands with celebrities and politicians covering one wall. He closed the door and turned to face her, his expression thunderous. "What do you think you're doing?" "She was cold. I gave her some water." "You gave her permission to stay in my lobby." Richard's voice was dangerously quiet. "Do you have any idea how many complaints I've received in the last 10 minutes? Do you understand what this does to this hotel's reputation when we allow homeless people to camp out in our seating areas?" "She's not camping, she's sitting." "Don't play semantic games with me, Morrison." Richard moved behind his desk, his fingers drumming an angry rhythm on the polished surface. "I've told you before that presentation is everything in this business. Guests don't pay $500 a night to share space with vagrants." The word hung in the air, ugly and deliberate. Emily felt something twist in her chest. "She's a person, not a vagrant." "She's a problem, and you're making it worse by encouraging her." Richard leaned forward. "Go back out there and tell her she needs to leave. Politely, professionally, but make it clear she's not welcome here." Emily's hands clenched at her sides. "No." The word surprised her as much as surprised Richard. She watched his expression shift from anger to disbelief. "Excuse me?" "I said no, she's not bothering anyone. She's just trying to get warm. It's raining and cold outside, and she's elderly. I'm not going to ask her to leave." Richard's face flushed red. "You're refusing a direct order from your manager." "I'm refusing to be cruel for no reason." "The reason," he said, articulating each word carefully, "is that this is a 5-star hotel with a reputation to maintain. We have standards, we have rules. And one of those rules is that we don't allow loitering by non-guests who negatively impact the experience of our paying customers." "Then maybe those rules need to change." Emily couldn't believe the words were coming out of her mouth. 3 years of keeping her head down, of being careful, of never making waves, and suddenly she couldn't stop talking. Something about Margaret's dignity in the face of discomfort, something about the trembling in those elderly hands had unlocked something in her. Richard stood slowly, his expression shifting from anger to something colder. "Miss Morrison, I'm going to give you one chance to reconsider. Go back to that lobby, ask that woman to leave, and we'll forget this conversation ever happened. Or you can continue with this misguided heroics and clear out your desk. Your choice." The threat hung between them, sharp and final. Emily thought about her mother's medical bills, about the culinary school savings account, about the 3 years she'd invested in this job. She thought about how hard it would be to find another position with this kind of stability. Then she thought about Margaret's blue eyes and weathered hands, about the businessman's look of disgust, and about the word vagrant spat out like a curse. "I'm not asking her to leave." Richard's jaw tightened. "Then you're fired, effective immediately. Collect your personal items and be out of the building within an hour." The words should have devastated her. Maybe they would later, when the adrenaline wore off and reality set in. But in that moment, Emily felt something unexpected. Relief. Relief at finally standing up for something. Relief at not having to pretend anymore that the job was worth compromising her values. "Fine," she said quietly. She turned and walked out of the office, her legs steadier than she had expected. The lobby seemed different now, brighter, somehow, despite the gray rain still streaming down the windows. Marcus watched her from his post, his expression unreadable,
A few guests glanced up, then quickly away, recognizing the walk of someone who'd just lost everything. Emily went to the reception desk and gathered her things. There wasn't much. A photo of her mother, a coffee mug with a chipped handle, a paperback novel she'd been reading during slow shifts. Everything else belonged to the hotel. Margaret was still sitting by the fire, but her eyes were open now, watching Emily's movements with that same sharp attention. Emily walked over to her, carrying her box of belongings. "I need to go, but you can stay as long as you need to. The next shift receptionist should be here soon. She's nicer than she looks." Her expression was hard to read. "You just lost your job for me." "I lost my job for doing what was right. There's a difference." "Is there?" Margaret stood slowly, gathering her plastic bags. "Come with me." "What?" "Come with me," Margaret repeated. "Right now. There's something you need to see." Emily was about to discover that defending Margaret Sullivan wasn't an act of simple kindness. It was the trigger that would expose a conspiracy reaching the highest levels of the hotel industry. And the woman she'd protected was the one person with the power to burn it all down.
Emily hesitated, confusion warring with curiosity. Something in Margaret's tone had changed, becoming more commanding, less fragile. The elderly woman no longer looked quite so defeated by the weather and circumstance. She stood straighter now, those blue eyes fixed on Emily with an intensity that made her previous exhaustion seem like a performance. "I don't understand," Emily said. "You will, but not here." Margaret glanced toward Richard's office, where the manager could be seen through the glass walls, already on the phone, probably calling security to ensure Emily was escorted out. "We don't have much time." Against her better judgment, Emily nodded. She'd already lost her job, already burned the bridge that had kept her employed for 3 years. What did she have to lose by following this strange woman who just cost her everything? They walked out together into the rain, Margaret moving with surprising energy for someone who'd seemed so exhausted just minutes before. A black car was waiting at the curb, sleek and expensive, with a driver who opened the door the moment he saw Margaret approaching. Emily stopped dead on the sidewalk. "What is this?" "Get in, please." Margaret was already sliding into the back seat. "I promise you, everything will make sense very soon." The driver looked at Emily expectantly. The rain was soaking through her blazer, and her box of belongings was getting wet. She looked back at the Grandview's gleaming facade, at the warm lobby where she'd spent 3 years of her life, then at Margaret's patient expression in the back of the luxury sedan. She got in the car. They drove in the silence through San Francisco's financial district, the rain making rivers of the streets. Emily clutched her box on her lap, her mind spinning with questions she didn't know how to ask. Margaret sat quietly beside her, no longer hunched and trembling, but sitting with perfect posture, her weathered hands folded calmly in her lap. The car pulled up in front of a high-rise office building, all glass and steel reaching into the gray sky. The driver opened the door, and Margaret stepped out, waiting for Emily to follow. They entered a lobby that made the Grandview look modest by comparison, all modern art and marble, with a security desk that required badges for access to the elevators. The security guard looked up as they approached, and his eyes widened with recognition. "Miss Sullivan, we weren't expecting you today." "Unscheduled visit, Tom. We'll be heading up to the executive floor." Tom nodded quickly, handing them visitor badges without asking for identification. Emily pinned hers on with shaking hands, her confusion deepening with every moment. Who was this woman? The elevator ride to the top floor was silent, except for the soft jazz playing through hidden speakers. Emily watched the numbers climb, 20 floors, 30, 40. They didn't stop until 62, the highest floor in the building. The doors opened directly into an office suite that took Emily's breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of San Francisco, the Golden Gate Bridge just visible through the rain and mist. The furniture was museum quality, the carpet so plush it felt like walking on clouds, and on the wall behind the massive desk hung a series of photographs, buildings, hotels, ribbons being cut at grand openings. Margaret walked to the desk and picked up a folder that had been waiting there. She handed it to Emily without a word.
Emily opened it with trembling hands. Inside were documents, official letterhead, corporate papers. The words swam before her eyes, but certain phrases jumped out. Sullivan Hotel Group, controlling interest, chief executive officer. And at the bottom of the first page, a signature. Margaret Sullivan. "I don't understand," Emily whispered. Margaret moved to stand by the window, looking out at the city below. When she spoke, her voice was different from before, no longer rough with exhaustion, but clear and authoritative. Sullivan Hotel Group owns 47 luxury hotels across North America. The Grandview is one of them. I founded the company 38 years ago with one small bed and breakfast in Vermont. I've built it into a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. And for the past 6 months, I've been visiting each of our properties incognito, evaluating how they treat people who can't fight back. Emily sank into one of the leather chairs, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. "You were testing us." "Testing is the wrong word. I was observing, seeing what happens when someone powerless walks through our doors, seeing which of our employees remember that hospitality means showing kindness to everyone, not just people who can afford our room rates. The Grandview isn't the first hotel you've done this to. 47th and final. I'm retiring at the end of the year, and I wanted to see the truth of what I'd built before I handed it over to the next generation." Margaret's expression was unreadable. "You are the only employee in 47 hotels who stood up for me, the only one who risked their job to show basic human decency." Emily felt dizzy. "So Richard will be fired? Is that why you brought me here, to tell me that he'll be punished?" "Richard Westwood has been fired for 3 previous hotel management positions for similar behavior. Each time he found a new position at another luxury property because hotels care more about profit margins than principles. But that's not why I brought you here." She slid a second folder across the desk. Emily opened it reluctantly, not sure she could handle any more revelations. Inside were more documents, financial records, emails, incident reports. As she read, a sick feeling spread through her stomach. The documents detailed a pattern of discrimination at the Grandview spanning years. Minority guests charged higher rates, complaints from people with disabilities ignored or dismissed, staff members fired for reporting harassment, and at the center of it all, Richard Westwood, protecting and perpetuating a culture of cruelty in the name of maintaining the hotel's prestige. "I found this while reviewing the Grandview's records last month," Margaret said quietly. "Richard has been very careful, but not careful enough. He's been running the hotel like his personal fiefdom, hurting people while hiding behind policies and procedures. You showing me this?" Margaret again pulled out another document. "Because I need someone I can trust to fix it. Someone who understands that real hospitality isn't about marble floors and crystal chandeliers. It's about treating every person who walks through your door with dignity and respect. I'm offering you Richard's job, Emily, general manager of the Grandview Hotel." The words didn't make sense. Emily read them, heard them, but her brain couldn't process their meaning. "You're offering me? But I was just a receptionist. I don't have the experience or the qualifications or—" "You have something more important than experience. You have integrity. And you've proven that when faced with a choice between your own security and doing the right thing, you'll choose right every time." Margaret's expression softened slightly. "I've read your file. You're smart, hardworking, and your performance reviews are excellent despite Richard's attempts to undermine you. You've been taking online hospitality management courses in your spare time. You volunteer at a homeless shelter twice a month. You're exactly the kind of person who should be running one of my hotels." Emily set down the folder, her hand shaking. "This is insane. People don't go from receptionist to general manager in one afternoon. People don't usually get fired for showing kindness either, but here we are." Margaret moved around the desk, sitting in the chair beside her rather than across from her. "I'm not saying it will be easy. There will be pushback. Some staff members won't accept you at first. Some guests will complain that you're too young, too inexperienced, but I'll support you every step of the way, and I believe you can do this." "Why me? There must be dozens of qualified candidates." "There are hundreds of qualified candidates with impressive resumes and years of experience, but none of them looked at a cold, tired woman and saw a human being who needed help. They saw a problem to be solved, a mess to be cleaned up, an inconvenience to be removed. You saw a person." Emily's throat tightened. She thought about her mother, about the medical bills, about the culinary school fund that would never grow now that she was unemployed. She thought about Marcus and the other staff at the Grandview, about the guests who'd looked at Margaret with disgust, about Richard's smug expression as he fired her. "There's something else," Margaret said, pulling out one more document. "I won't lie to you about what you're walking into. Richard has friends in this industry, powerful friends. When you take his job, they'll come after you. They'll try to undermine you, to prove you're not qualified, to force you out. This won't be easy." "Then why risk it? Why not just fire Richard and hire someone with experience who can handle the politics?" Margaret smiled, and for the first time, Emily saw real warmth in that weathered face. "I'm 72 years old, and I've spent 4 decades building a company I'm proud of, but somewhere along the way, places like the Grandview lost sight of what matters. They became temples to wealth and status instead of homes away from home. I want to change that before I'm gone, and I can't do it with managers who care more about profit margins than people." She stood, offering her hand to Emily. "I'm offering you a chance to be part of that change, to prove that kindness isn't weakness, and that good people can succeed in this industry without compromising their values. But I need to know now, are you in?" Emily's decision would transform her life, but the real battle was just beginning, because Richard Westwood wasn't going down without a fight, and the secrets he'd been hiding were darker than anyone imagined.
Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Emily took Margaret's hand and shook it, sealing her fate with that simple gesture. She had no idea what she was agreeing to, no clear picture of the challenges ahead, but something in her gut told her this was right. This was the moment her life had been pointing toward, even when she couldn't see it. The transition happened faster than Emily could process. Margaret's assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia, appeared within minutes with contracts, paperwork, and a schedule that made Emily's head spin. There would be a brief orientation period, 2 weeks of intensive training with Margaret personally overseeing her preparation, and then a formal announcement to the Grandview staff. "We're not hiding what happened," Margaret explained, as Patricia organized documents on the conference table. "Everyone will know that you were fired by Richard for defending me, and that you're now his replacement. Transparency is important. Some people will respect the truth. Others will resent it. But at least everyone will understand where things stand." Emily signed papers until her hand cramped, each signature feeling surreal. Her salary as general manager was nearly 4 times what she'd made as a receptionist. The benefits included full health coverage for her and her mother, a housing allowance, and an education stipend that would cover culinary school tuition if she still wanted to pursue that dream. It was more money than she'd ever imagined earning, more security than she'd thought possible. But beneath the excitement, a knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. She kept thinking about what Margaret had said. Richard has friends. Powerful friends. The first week of training was intensive and exhausting. Margaret was a demanding teacher, walking Emily through every aspect of hotel operations, from housekeeping logistics to financial forecasting to crisis management. They toured other Sullivan properties, met with department heads, reviewed case studies of both successes and failures. Emily absorbed it all like a sponge, staying up late into the night studying manuals and procedures, determined to prove she belonged in this role. Margaret's approach to hospitality was revolutionary in its simplicity. Treat everyone like a human being first and a customer second. Make decisions based on kindness and common sense rather than rigid rules. Empower staff to solve problems creatively rather than by rote.
It sounded obvious when explained that way, but Emily's was learning how rare it actually was in practice. On the 8th day of training, Patricia appeared in the conference room with a troubled expression. "We have a problem." Margaret looked up from the budget review she and Emily had been conducting. "What kind of problem?" "Richard filed a wrongful termination lawsuit this morning. He's claiming age discrimination and defamation of character. He's also given interviews to several hospitality industry publications suggesting that Sullivan Hotel Group is in financial trouble and making erratic management decisions." Emily felt ice settle in her stomach. "Can he do that?" "He can try," Margaret said calmly, though her jaw had tightened. "What else?" 3 managers at the Grandview have submitted their resignations, effective immediately. They're citing concerns about the company's direction and leadership stability. Patricia handed over a folder. "And we've received complaints from 2 major corporate clients threatening to cancel their contracts if the Grandview's quality and reputation are compromised by inexperienced management." The room fell silent. Emily stared at the documents, watching her new career crumble before it had even begun. This was what Margaret had warned her about: the pushback, the resistance, the powerful friends coming after her. "This is my fault," Emily said quietly. "If I just step aside, let you hire someone with actual experience?" "No," Margaret's voice was sharp. "This is exactly what Richard wants. He's trying to intimidate us into backing down, into admitting that his way was right. We're not giving him that satisfaction." "But the lawsuit, the resignations, the corporate clients are all manageable problems." Margaret stood, pacing to the window. "Richard is counting on us being afraid of bad publicity. He thinks we'll fold rather than fight. He's wrong." Over the next few days, Emily watched Margaret handle the crisis with a combination of legal maneuvering and strategic communications that was masterful to observe. The company's lawyers filed a countersuit against Richard, including all the documentation of his discriminatory practices. Margaret personally called each corporate client, explaining the situation and the positive changes being implemented at the Grandview. But the most important move came when Margaret decided to go public with the whole story. The press conference was held in the lobby of Sullivan Hotel Group's headquarters. Reporters from major news outlets packed the room, cameras rolling as Margaret took the podium. Emily stood to the side, her hands clenched so tightly her nails dug into her palms. Margaret didn't mince words. She explained her undercover evaluation, described her experience at the Grandview, and detailed exactly what Emily had done and why it mattered. She showed the evidence of Richard's systematic discrimination and explained why Sullivan Hotel Group was committing to real change, even if that meant facing lawsuits and losing clients who didn't share their values. "I've spent my career building hotels," Margaret said, her voice carrying across the silent room. "But somewhere along the way, we lost sight of who hotels are really for. They're not monuments to wealth. They're not exclusive clubs for the privileged. They're places where travelers should feel welcome, where families should feel safe, where every person, regardless of their appearance or bank account, should be treated with dignity." She gestured to Emily. "This young woman reminded me of that. She risked everything to show kindness to someone she thought was powerless. That's the kind of person I want running my hotels. That's the kind of value system I want at the heart of this company." The questions from reporters were intense, skeptical, sometimes hostile. But Margaret answered each one with calm authority, never defensive, always clear about the values she was fighting for. By the end of the conference, Emily saw several reporters nodding thoughtfully, their initial skepticism softening. The story exploded across news and social media. Some outlets praised Margaret's courage and Emily's compassion. Others criticized the decision as naive and bad business. The hospitality industry split into camps, with some leaders applauding the move while others called it virtue signaling and poor management. But public opinion began to shift. Stories emerged from former Grandview employees detailing Richard's behavior. Guests came forward with their own experiences of discrimination at luxury hotels. A conversation started about what hospitality really meant and who it should serve. 3 days after the press conference, 2 of the 3 managers who'd resigned asked to return to their positions at the Grandview. The corporate clients who threatened to leave decided to stay. And Richard's lawsuit suddenly looked a lot weaker, when depositions from former staff members began revealing the extent of his misconduct. Emily's official start date as general manager arrived on a Monday in early December. She stood in the Grandview's lobby, wearing a new suit that Margaret had insisted on buying for her, and faced a staff that was wary, curious, and deeply uncertain about their new boss. Marcus, the head of security, was the first to approach. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I should have backed you up that day. I saw what was happening and I chose protocol over conscience. I won't make that mistake again." It wasn't much, but it was a start. Emily spent her first day meeting with every department, listening to concerns, answering questions, and beginning to rebuild the trust that Richard had systematically destroyed. Some staff members were receptive. Others were openly hostile, seeing her as an interloper who got lucky. The real test came 2 weeks later when a well-dressed businessman checked in for a 3-night stay. He was loud, demanding, and made increasingly inappropriate comments to the female staff members. On his second night, Emily received a complaint that he had been verbally abusive to a housekeeper, berating her for not turning down his bed fast enough. Emily knew this moment mattered. Everyone was watching to see how the new general manager would handle a problem guest. Would she prioritize profit and reputation, the way Richard had, or would she stand by the values she claimed to represent? She went to his room personally and knocked on the door. When he answered, clearly annoyed at the interruption, Emily introduced herself calmly. "Mr. Bradley, I need to inform you that your behavior toward our staff is unacceptable. You have a choice. You can treat our employees with respect for the remainder of your stay, or you can find accommodations elsewhere, tonight." His face turned red. "Do you have any idea who I am? I spend 6 figures a year on hotel stays. I'll have you fired for this." "I'm aware of your annual spending, sir, and I'm still asking you to leave if you can't treat people with basic decency. Your choice." He chose to leave, and Emily helped him find a room at a competing hotel. The incident cost the Grandview thousands in lost revenue, and potentially more if the man followed through on his threats to spread negative reviews. But the next morning, Emily found a note that someone had slipped under her office door. It was from the housekeeper who'd been berated, thanking Emily for standing up for her. Similar notes appeared throughout the week from other staff members. The tide was beginning to turn. Just when Emily thought she'd weathered the worst of the storm, a discovery in the hotel's basement would reveal that Richard's crimes went far deeper than anyone suspected, and that Emily would have to decide how far she was willing to go for justice.
It was Maria from housekeeping who found the boxes. She'd been looking for extra linens in the basement storage area when she noticed a section of shelving that didn't quite match the rest. Behind old conference room chairs and outdated lobby decorations, someone had stacked dozens of file boxes, each one carefully labeled with dates going back 15 years. Maria brought one box to Emily's office, her expression troubled. "I thought these were just old records, but when I looked inside, I think you need to see this." Emily opened a box and felt her blood run cold. Inside were personnel files for employees she'd never heard of, people who'd worked at the Grandview during Richard's tenure. But these weren't standard HR records. They were documentation of complaints, harassment allegations, discrimination reports, wage theft claims. Each file was marked with Richard's notes, handled quietly, settle without admission, ensure silence. "How many boxes are there?" Emily asked quietly. "At least 30, maybe more. They go back years." Emily spent the rest of the day in the basement with Patricia and the company's legal team, carefully documenting what they'd found. The scope of Richard's wrongdoing was staggering. He'd systematically covered up complaints, paid off victims with non-disclosure agreements, and destroyed the careers of anyone who'd tried to speak up. The files contained stories of immigrants threatened with deportation if they reported wage violations, women pressured into silence after harassment, minority employees passed over for promotions while less qualified white candidates advanced. What made it worse was the realization that Richard hadn't acted alone. Several other managers had been complicit, helping him bury complaints and intimidate victims. The culture of cruelty at the Grandview ran deeper than Emily had imagined. "We need to report this to the authorities," Patricia said, her face pale as she read through another file. "This isn't just unethical business practice. Some of this is criminal." Emily nodded, but her mind was racing ahead to the implications.
Going public with this would create a media firestorm. It would damage the Grandview's reputation, possibly beyond repair. Corporate clients would flee. Guests would cancel reservations. The hotel she'd just taken over might not survive the scandal. But staying silent meant letting Richard and his accomplices escape accountability for years of abuse. It meant that victims would never see justice. Margaret arrived at the hotel within hours of Emily's call. She descended into the basement and stood among the boxes, her expression growing darker as Patricia briefed her on what they'd found. "How did we miss this?" Margaret asked, her voice tight with controlled anger. "We do annual audits. We have compliance reviews. How did no one catch this?" "Richard was smart," Patricia was explaining. "He kept these files separate from the official HR records. As far as the company knew, these complaints were resolved appropriately. The victims were paid settlements that appeared standard, and the NDAs prevented anyone from coming forward." Margaret picked up one of the files, reading through it with increasing fury. It detailed a case from 8 years ago. A young man who'd reported sexual harassment by a senior manager. Richard had forced him to accept a minimal settlement and sign an NDA threatening legal action if he ever spoke about the incident. The harasser had been quietly promoted to another Sullivan property rather than fired. "Contact every person in these files," Margaret said, her voice like steel. "Tell them we're voiding the NDAs. Tell them we'll support them if they want to pursue legal action or come forward publicly, and get law enforcement involved immediately." "Margaret," Emily said carefully, "this is going to destroy the Grandview. Maybe other Sullivan properties too if this gets out." "Then it gets out." Margaret set down the file and looked Emily in the eye. "I told you when I offered you this job that we were fighting for something bigger than profit margins. This is what that fight looks like. It's messy and it's going to cost us, but it's right." The next 72 hours were a blur of police interviews, lawyer consultations, and crisis management meetings. Emily barely slept, surviving on coffee and determination. The legal team worked to contact victims from the files, many of whom were shocked to hear from the company that once silenced them. Some were angry, refusing to engage with Sullivan Hotel Group in any capacity. Others were cautiously hopeful that real accountability might finally come. A few broke down in tears, relieved that someone was finally listening. The story broke 3 days later, when a former employee decided to go public. Her account of being harassed, reporting it to Richard, and then being forced out of her job while the harasser faced no consequences went viral. Other victims began coming forward, their stories forming a damning picture of systematic abuse covered up for years. The media descended on the Grandview like locusts. News vans parked outside, reporters ambushed staff members leaving work. Emily's phone rang constantly with interview requests, threats, and messages of support in equal measure. Richham's lawyers released a statement denying everything and accusing Sullivan Hotel Group of fabricating evidence to justify his wrongful termination. But their defense crumbled when police announced a criminal investigation into the cover-up, citing the boxes of evidence found in the basement. 3 of Richard's former managers were fired within the week. 2 others resigned before they could be terminated. The exodus left the Grandview's management structure in chaos, with Emily scrambling to fill critical positions while maintaining operations. Occupancy rates plummeted as guests canceled reservations. Corporate events were moved to other venues. The hotel's online reviews filled with comments about the scandal. Financially, the Grandview was hemorrhaging money. Emily sat in her office late one night staring at the latest financial report. At this rate, the hotel would be operating at a loss within 2 months. She'd been general manager for less than 6 weeks and had already presided over the property's spectacular decline. There was a knock at her door. Marcus, the head of security, stepped in looking exhausted. "Thought you might want to know. 3 more reservations just came in for next month, all from people who specifically mentioned they wanted to support what we're doing here." Emily looked up, surprised. 3 reservations won't save us." "Nope, but it's something." Marcus sat down across from her. "I've been here 12 years, Emily. I watched Richard build a culture where people were afraid to speak up, afraid to do the right thing because it might cost them their jobs. You're tearing that down. It's painful and it's expensive, but it matters. It matters if we survive long enough to see it through. Then we find a way to survive." Marcus leaned forward. "You stood up for a woman you thought was homeless when it meant losing your job. The least I can do is help you figure out how to keep this hotel running." Over the following weeks, Emily and her remaining staff worked 18-hour days to stabilize operations. They reached out to local businesses offering discounted rates for conferences and events. They partnered with nonprofits, providing free meeting space, and reduced room rates for organizations doing community work. They launched a transparency initiative, publicly sharing the hotel's policies and inviting community oversight. Slowly, painfully, things began to shift. The guests who came now were different from the Grandview's traditional clientele. They were people who valued ethics over luxury, substance over status. Occupancy rates stayed lower than before, but the guests who did stay were engaged and loyal. Margaret visited regularly, offering guidance but letting Emily lead. One afternoon, as they reviewed the quarterly reports, Margaret smiled.
"You're doing better than I expected," she said. "Not financially. Those numbers are still rough. But culturally, you're building something genuine here." "At this rate, we won't have a culture to build much longer," Emily replied, gesturing to the red ink bleeding across the financial statements. "I'm not worried about that. I've got enough capital to keep the Grandview running until you turn it around. And you will turn it around." Margaret closed the folder. "The question isn't whether you'll succeed, it's what kind of leader you'll become in the process." The investigation into Richard's activities concluded 6 months after Emily became general manager. He was charged with multiple counts of fraud, obstruction of justice, and violating employment laws. 3 of his former managers faced similar charges. The trial wouldn't happen for another year, but the indictments sent shockwaves through the hospitality industry. Sullivan Hotel Group settled with victims for an undisclosed but substantial amount, explicitly refusing to require NDAs as part of the settlements. Margaret established a victims fund and implemented new company-wide policies requiring independent oversight of harassment and discrimination complaints. The Grandview became a case study in both business schools and ethics courses, an example of the real cost of choosing principle over profit and the long, difficult work of cultural transformation. Emily stood in the lobby one evening watching guests check in. The marble still gleamed, the chandelier still sparkled, but the atmosphere had changed. Staff members smiled more genuinely. Guests seemed more relaxed. There was a warmth that hadn't existed under Richard's regime. A family entered through the revolving doors, parents with 2 young children and an elderly grandmother moving slowly with a walker. Emily watched as the front desk clerk, David, immediately came around the desk to help with their luggage, making sure the grandmother had a comfortable place to sit while they checked in. 6 months ago, under Richard's leadership, that family might have been tolerated, but not welcomed. Now David treated them with the same attentive care he'd show anyone because that's what the Grandview's culture had become. Emily's phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. "Board meeting tomorrow. They want to discuss the Grandview's future. Be prepared." Emily's stomach tightened. The board had been patient, but their patience wasn't infinite. The hotel was still operating at a loss. Changes took time to show results, but board members cared about quarterly reports and shareholder value. The next morning, Emily entered the Sullivan Hotel Group boardroom wearing the same suit she'd worn on her first day as general manager. She'd prepared a presentation detailing the cultural changes, the positive press from the transparency initiative, and the slow but steady improvement in guest satisfaction scores. But before she could begin her presentation, Margaret stood and addressed the board. "Before we hear Emily's report, I want to share something." Margaret pulled up a document on the screen. "This is from our brand reputation study conducted last month by an independent firm. It shows that Sullivan Hotel Group's overall brand perception has improved 23% since we went public with the reforms at the Grandview." Murmurs rippled around the table. Margaret continued, "Consumers, particularly younger demographics, are actively seeking out companies that demonstrate genuine ethical commitment. Our transparency about the problems we found and our willingness to prioritize people over profit has actually strengthened our brand across all properties." She pulled up another slide showing reservation data.
While the Grandview is still recovering, our other properties have seen a 7% increase in bookings. Revenue across the company is up. The market is responding positively to what we're doing." Emily felt a weight lift from her chest. The sacrifices, the difficult decisions, the financial losses, they were starting to pay off in ways that went beyond the Grandview itself. One board member, an older man with steel-gray hair, leaned forward and said, "The numbers are encouraging, but let's be clear about what happened here. We got lucky. Emily's actions could have destroyed the company. They nearly destroyed the Grandview." "With respect, Marcus," Margaret replied coolly, "we didn't get lucky. We made intentional choices to prioritize ethics over short-term profit, and those choices are now generating long-term value. That's not luck, that's leadership."
The board meeting concluded with cautious approval to continue the current strategy, though Emily knew she'd need to show concrete financial improvement within the next 2 quarters. As she left the boardroom, Margaret caught up with her in the hallway. "Walk with me," Margaret said. They took the elevator down to street level and walked through the financial district, the afternoon sun breaking through San Francisco's infamous fog. Margaret moved slowly, and Emily noticed for the first time how much the older woman had aged over the past months. The stress of fighting for change had taken its toll. "I'm announcing my retirement next month," Margaret said. "It's time." Emily nodded, unsurprised but saddened. "You've earned it." "I wanted you to hear it from me first. The board will be looking for my replacement." Margaret paused at a crosswalk. "They're going to offer you the position." Emily stopped walking. "What?" "CEO of Sullivan Hotel Group. They'll make it official after my retirement is announced." Margaret smiled at Emily's shocked expression. "Don't look so surprised. You've proven yourself 10 times over these past months." "I've been a general manager for 6 months. I'm not qualified to run an entire hotel company." "You weren't qualified to be a general manager either, according to conventional wisdom. How'd that work out?" Margaret started walking again. "Emily, qualification isn't just about credentials and experience. It's about character. It's about the ability to make difficult decisions and live with the consequences. You've demonstrated that more clearly than anyone I know." They reached a small park and sat on a bench overlooking a playground where children chased each other across the grass. Emily watched them play, her mind spinning with the magnitude of what Margaret was saying. "I don't know if I can do this," Emily admitted quietly. "Of course you can't. Not alone," Margaret's voice was gentle. "But that's the secret they don't tell you about leadership. Nobody does it alone. You build a team of people you trust, people who share your values, and you work together. You've already started doing that at the Grandview." "The Grandview is one hotel. This would be 47 properties, thousands of employees, millions in revenue." "And the same fundamental principle," Margaret interrupted. "Treat people with dignity. Make decisions based on what's right rather than what's expedient. Build a culture where kindness isn't punished but rewarded. You know how to do this, Emily. You've been doing it all along." Emily thought about that cold, rainy evening when Margaret had walked into the Grandview's lobby. She thought about the choice she'd made to defend a stranger, not knowing it would cost her job. She thought about Richard's face when she'd refused to back down, about the boxes of hidden files in the basement, about the victims who'd finally found their voices after years of silence. "If I accept this," Emily said slowly, "I'm going to make enemies. There are people in this industry who think what we're doing is naive or worse. You already have made enemies. The question is whether you're going to let them intimidate you into silence." Margaret turned to face her. "I'm 72 years old, Emily. I built a company I'm proud of, but I also made mistakes. I trusted the wrong people. I didn't ask enough questions. I let a culture of cruelty grow in my hotels because I was too focused on expansion and profit. I can't undo those mistakes, but I can try to leave the company in hands that will do better." The weight of that trust settled on Emily's shoulders. It should have felt crushing, but instead it felt clarifying. She'd spent 3 years keeping her head down, playing it safe, afraid of losing the little security she had. Then one moment of courage had blown her life apart and rebuilt it into something she never could have imagined. "I'll need your help," Emily said finally.
especially at the beginning. Margaret smiled. You'll have it. I'm retiring, not disappearing. 3 months later, Emily stood at a podium in the Grandview's renovated ballroom, addressing Sullivan Hotel Group employees from all 47 properties who'd gathered for the annual company meeting. She'd been CEO for 2 weeks, and the weight of the title still felt surreal. I want to tell you a story, Emily began, her voice carrying across the silent room. Less than a year ago, I was a receptionist at this hotel. I was nobody important, just another face behind a desk. But one evening, I had to make a choice between keeping my job and doing what I thought was right. I chose right, and it cost me everything I'd worked for. She paused, looking out at the sea of faces, housekeepers and managers, front desk clerks and executives, people from every level of the company hierarchy. I'm not telling you this to make myself look heroic. I'm telling you because I want you to understand what this company stands for now. We're not perfect. We're still fixing problems that should never have been allowed to develop. We're still learning how to balance business success with ethical responsibility. But we're trying, and I need every person in this room to be part of that effort. Emily clicked to the next slide, showing the company's new mission statement. Hospitality means everyone. These 3 words are going to guide every decision we make going forward. When you're faced with a choice between convenience and compassion, choose compassion. When you see someone being mistreated, speak up. When you have the power to help someone, use it. This isn't just about being nice. It's about recognizing that the way we treat people, all people, defines who we are as a company and as human beings.
She told them about the changes being implemented: independent ethics oversight, anonymous complaint systems, mandatory training on bias and discrimination, and a new policy that no employee would face retaliation for reporting concerns. Some of you might think this is naive, Emily continued. You might believe that business and ethics don't mix, that we have to compromise our values to compete. I'm here to tell you that's wrong. Over the past 6 months, while the Grandview has been going through this transformation, our company-wide revenue has grown. Our brand reputation has strengthened. Our employee satisfaction scores have improved. Doing the right thing isn't just morally correct, it's good business. After the presentation, employees lined up to speak with her. Some had concerns about the changes. Others shared their own stories of witnessing or experiencing problems in their hotels. A housekeeper from the Portland property told Emily about a manager who'd been verbally abusive, and Emily made a note to have that situation investigated immediately. Marcus approached near the end, looking uncomfortable in his suit and tie. Never thought I'd see the day when the receptionist became the boss, he said with a slight smile. Never thought I'd see the day when I'd be grateful to lose my job, Emily replied. For what it's worth, you're doing a good job, better than good. Marcus glanced around the ballroom. People believe you. They trust that you mean what you say. That's rare in this industry. That evening, Emily returned to her office, not at the Grandview anymore, but at Sullivan Hotel Group headquarters. The space was larger than she needed, with windows overlooking the city and furniture that cost more than her old annual salary. She kept thinking she'd wake up and find this was all a dream, that she was still behind the reception desk trying to make it through another shift. Her phone buzzed with a message from her mother. Saw your speech online. Your father would be so proud. Emily smiled, tears pricking her eyes. Her father had died when she was 15, but she remembered his advice. Do the right thing even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. She thought about all the moments over the past year when doing the right thing had been terrifying. Refusing to ask Margaret to leave, standing up to Richard, going public with the files from the basement, taking a job she wasn't qualified for, and now accepting responsibility for an entire company. Each choice had felt impossible in the moment. Each one had consequences she couldn't predict. But each one had also led her to this place, to this opportunity to make a real difference in people's lives. Emily pulled up the company's financial reports on her computer. The Grandview was still struggling, but the trajectory was improving. Other properties were thriving under the new ethical framework. The company was healthy, growing, and building something that would last beyond quarterly earnings reports. She thought about the victims who'd come forward after years of silence,
finally finding justice. She thought about the employees who now felt safe reporting problems. She thought about the guests who chose Sullivan Hotels specifically because they valued what the company stood for. This was what leadership looked like, she realized. Not the glamorous image from movies and magazines, but the daily work of making difficult choices and living with their consequences. It was messy and exhausting and sometimes terrifying. It was also the most meaningful thing she'd ever done. Emily closed her laptop and looked out at the city lights spreading below her office window. Somewhere out there, in one of those thousands of buildings, someone was facing their own impossible choice. Someone was deciding whether to speak up or stay silent, whether to risk security for principle, whether to do the right thing even when it cost them everything. She hoped they'd choose courage. She hoped they'd find, as she had, that the cost of doing right was always worth paying. And she hoped that when they made that choice, they'd find themselves surrounded by people ready to catch them when they fell and help them rise higher than they ever imagined possible. Because that's what happened when you built a culture on compassion rather than cruelty, on justice rather than expedience, on the radical belief that every person who walked through your door deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. Emily Morrison had learned that lesson as a receptionist. Now, as the CEO of Sullivan Hotel Group, she would spend the rest of her career teaching it to everyone else. The homeless woman in the lobby hadn't been powerless after all. But then again, neither had the receptionist who defended her. They'd both just needed the courage to use the power they had and to recognize that the greatest power any person possesses is the choice to be kind when kindness costs everything. That choice had changed Emily's life. Now it would change an entire industry. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Let's start conversations that matter, the ones that lead to change. Subscribe for more stories that challenge us, inspire us, and remind us of what we're capable of when we stand for what's right.
Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss these. Just click to watch and don't forget to subscribe.